It's my pleasure to welcome you once again to another episode of Real Estate Chat with ESV Olaliko Aboderin. This is a production of REST Publication, otherwise known as Real Estate Services and Transaction, which is a subsidiary of Reals Academy Limited. Reals Academy Limited is a real estate professional development center here in Lagos, Nigeria. In the house, of course, we have ESV Olaliko Aboderin. He is the lead advisor of Olaliko Aboderin Consulting, a firm of estate surveyors and valuers, and is also the director of studies of Reals Academy Limited. Thank you, sir, for joining us for another episode.
Thank you, viewers. Femi, thank you.
In the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about mortgage properties, buying mortgage properties, the challenges involved in buying mortgage properties, and so many other things that we have discussed under that particular topic. So for today, we're going to focus on the processes required in buying a mortgage property. So I would want us to start on that note, because I know a number of people, they've learned so much on all the things that we've discussed in the last 2 weeks. Now they want to understand that, okay, what is the process involved when I want to buy a mortgage property?
Thank you. Well, I think it's very important because most of the challenges that the buyer of mortgage property will face can be addressed in the process of buying the property. So if the property is actually bought, genuinely fulfilling all these processes, the challenges will be minimal or can tend to zero. So what's the process? The process that are required to follow is a function of whether you are buying a property under legal mortgage,
Okay.
or you are buying a property under equitable mortgage,
Okay.
or you are buying a property under legal mortgage but from the mortgagee.
Okay.
That's the bank.
Okay.
Or you are buying a property, that same property, under mortgagor from mortgagor.
Okay.
And if it's equitable, under mortgagee or from mortgagor.
Okay.
So the situation, the processes are not the same. I think I want to first of all take the processes that will be required for investor to follow when buying mortgage property from a mortgagor.
Okay.
That is where the seller who wants to sell now is the person that had mortgaged his property.
Yes.
The person that mortgaged his property is the mortgagor. Okay. Now, the first thing that must be done is due diligence on the property to be bought.
Okay.
Don't forget that you cannot place something on
nothing.
nothing.
That's correct. If
the risk is very high, chances are that when it's a mortgage property, people tend to forget about, necessary search concerning the root of the title that is mortgaged. So the first thing is to ensure due diligences on the title that is mortgaged before talking about the mortgage itself, right? So that due diligences is very important. One, to be sure about the interest that subsists in the property. Two, to be sure about the nature of the title. Three, to be sure of, apart from the mortgage, are there other financial obligations that the title has, that has as indebted. So all this must be done, and to be sure of transferability. Now, apart from that due diligence, it's now important, where is the owner of the property that want to sell, right? And is selling under legal mortgage.
Okay.
In that wise, legal mortgage means the title is with bank. Okay. And bank has processed governors or ministers' consent on the deed of mortgage, and hence bank is a registered person. Okay. Against that title in the registry, land registry. So where such is to be bought, and now the owner of the property want to buy. Part of the due diligences that the buyer must observe is to confirm from the bank to find out about the indebtedness. How much debt? Okay. One, if the indebtedness is lesser than the amount that the property is to be sold, is safer. Okay. Where the loan is more than how much to generate from the sales of the property, it's better not to even buy that kind of property at all. Now, because the reason is that even if the property is bought, that money, the proceeds from the sales will not be able to pay off the loan, and hence the title will not still be free.
That's correct.
Okay. So in this situation, what should happen is the buyer, part of the process he has to do, find out the details of the mortgage.
Okay.
Be sure that if the money is paid, right? If the money is paid, it's going to neutralize or pay off the loan, and the title can be released.
Okay.
Now, a necessary process in that circumstance is to tie bank into that transaction. That is very, very important. Tie the bank into the transaction. How? Ensuring that meeting the seller, who is the mortgagor, initiates meeting with the bank at the instance of the buyer. The three of them will discuss and agree, and there must be what we call escrow agreements. Okay. That's very, very important. So that bank cannot, after that meeting and they have agreed on the processes and how to settle bank will not be in a position to say, I don't know you. That is, he does not know the buyer. The safest thing to do in that situation is for the buyer to insist that upon payment, that one, the sales price will be paid in 2 or 3 installments. One is to be paid to the bank. Okay. So as to pay off the indebtedness. Upon paying off the indebtedness, bank reserves, that bank has the obligation to release the document, the original document, and has the obligation to issue deed of release because it's a legal mortgage. Okay. Now, in this situation, the two ordinarily will be released to the mortgagor, who is their clients, who want to sell the property now. Okay. In this case, it's risky for buyer to allow that to happen. Okay. So in the escrow agreement and in the tripartite, in the escrow agreement and in their tripartite meeting, they must have agreed on that arrangement that upon effecting this payment, the bank will be under obligation to release the documents to the buyer. Okay. With the consent and agreement of the seller, that's the mortgagor. The deed, that's the document, that title to the property, and the deed of release must be released to the buyer. It's better for the buyer to collect it. Okay. Then the remaining balance will be paid to the seller, that's the mortgagor. So in that situation, there will be need for a contract of sales. Okay. So I've mentioned two important documents. One is escrow agreement. Yeah. Another one is contract of sales. The contract of sales will be binding the seller and the buyer. Okay. The seller here being the mortgagor in that banking relationship. Okay. And the buyer being the one that is interested in buying the mortgaged property. So with that, it's going to tie the two of them based on conditions of that transaction. That they have agreed that so payment should be made to the bank to pay off the indebtedness. That upon payment, he is entitled to collect the original documents from the bank. Okay. And that is upon release of that, he is under obligation to pay final payment to the seller, that's the mortgagor. Equally, that the mortgagor has agreed and is willing to execute. But in this case, so long is a legal mortgage, bank will issue deed of release. Okay. Before whatever deed that the mortgagor now execute will be valid. Okay. Bank must issue deed of release. Okay. So these are the processes that must be followed. Okay. Why, if it is a mortgagor that want to sell a property under legal mortgage. Okay. It must ensure bank is tied into it. Very, very important. This type of situation is safer than another condition where the mortgagee is the one to sell. Okay. Because in this case, the challenges of having to go to court by mortgagor is no more there. That's correct, yes. It's no more there. It's the one that has sold. But it's equally the risk to the buyer in this case is that if he does not tie the bank into that transaction, he might not be able to access the original title from the bank. The seller, who is the mortgagor, reserves the right to access his original title. After getting the title, he's at comfort. no more indebtedness. He can say, he can change his mind.
That's correct.
He might be fraudulent about it and he says, sorry, I'm no more selling. Or that now he has, the indebtedness is no more there. Okay. He has now decided to go for higher bidder. Okay. Those are the risk exposure that the buyer could face. And that's why there must be escrow agreements and there must be tripartite meeting with the bank. Bank must be brought into the transaction so that at that time all parties are involved and the buyer can go and sleep.
So, sir, yes, you spoke about escrow agreements. I just want you to explain a bit further on that.
Oh, okay. Escrow agreements is a necessary document. It's an agreement in this case that will be required. It's an agreement that has to do with between two parties at the instance of the third party. Okay. That's escrow agreement. In this case, it will tie the bank and the mortgagor, that's the seller, and the buyer. Okay. Don't forget that in the banking relationship, the buyer is not known. Is not involved. Now, but equally in the transaction between in buying the property, ordinarily the bank wouldn't have come in. Okay. So the bank will hold a pending obligation. Okay. He ordinarily holds that obligation to the mortgagor to release the title to the mortgagor upon payment of the mortgage loan. Okay. Right? But because the buyer wants to be safe, he wants to ensure that the bank will recognize his right to that title and release that title to him. Okay. That is to the buyer now. Okay. That escrow agreement will now be created to ensure that that pending obligation will be done and be done in favor of the buyer. Okay. And the main focus of that agreement is basically to look at, to guarantee the performance of that pending obligation of the release of the original title of the property and deed of release to the buyer instead of to the mortgagor, because that's a risk area that the buyer could suffer from. Okay. So that escrow agreement will now empower the bank. Subject the three of them will sign. Okay. Is a tripartite thing. The three of them will sign, and that pending obligation will now be upon meeting the obligation of paying off the loan. Don't forget that payment will come from the buyer now as part payment for the purchase of the property. Okay. So upon that payment, the agreement will be the original documents and deed of release and all other document of title will be released to the buyer and not the mortgagor. And when that is done, the life of that escrow agreement ends. Okay. Yes. So contract of sales continues. Okay. Right? Until both parties fulfill all necessary obligations to that contract. Okay. Part of which could be to execute, to hand over, and so on the part of buyer to pay as agreed, and so on and so forth. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. So the question now comes: what are the documents that can be obtained when it comes to buying mortgage property and all this? Oh, okay. Thank you. And that's very important because these days, in fact, of recent, we had to do a transaction on a property and got stuck at a point. Why? Because on conducting the search, it was realized that there was an encumbrance on the property. Wow. And meanwhile, the owner claimed not to have any encumbrance. Yeah. That he had, in fact, he could not remember when last he got loan and he had paid up. Wow. Right? So, whereas he left a lacuna, he left a gap. Wow. Okay. Now, what are the documents that should be obtained? In the first instance, there must be deed of assignment. Okay. Deed of assignment is to transfer the right and land in favor of the buyer now. Mm-hmm. In this case, because it's the mortgagor that is selling, the mortgagor will be the one to issue the deed of assignment. But he's selling subject to a legal mortgage. That's correct. Yeah. When he issues that deed of assignment, the buyer will not be able to perfect his rights with government in the ministry, in lands ministry. Why? Because since it's a legal mortgage, the interest of the mortgagee, that's the bank, has been reflected on the title. Hence, another document that will be required in concluding this transaction to ensure effective transfer of rights in land to the buyer is what we call deed of release. The bank will issue deed of release, indicating that the property has now been released of all indebtedness and encumbrances.
So it's free from any encumbrances.
It's free from any encumbrances. There must be that deed of release. Equally, there can be need for what we call power of attorney. It's not compulsory, but it's always, you see, I always say that when you do transaction, no document can be too much. So power of attorney, because for example, if the buyer has not been able to go and process perfection of his interest with the assignment, we can still be exercising the right under that power of attorney. And if not for Lagos, it's easier to even register power of attorney. So power of attorney can be obtained. Deed of release, very, very important. But apart from that, I said earlier that the escrow agreement will guarantee release of original title of the property and that deed of release to the buyer. In this case, part of the document that the buyer must have on consummating that deal is the original title of that property. Now, another important document is what we call transfer form or letter. This has to be issued in this case, in this circumstance. It has to be issued by the mortgagor, who is the one selling. The circumstance where mortgagor says under a legal mortgage, that is where bank will release what we call deed of release. Now, any other forms of transfer will be issued by the mortgagor, who is the seller in this case. Now, in Lagos, there's what we call Form 1C. That's a transfer form. In Lagos, the mortgagor must sign that. In Ogun, they have what they call transfer form. In Abuja, for example, in Federal, particularly Aegis, they have transfer letter. In federal lands, they have letter of consent to transfer. All these documents must be collected. If it's Lagos, if it's a property in Lagos State, Form 1C must be executed by the mortgagor, who is the seller here, right? Who is transferring his rights. If it's Ogun, transfer form must be executed. And wherever part of the country, the type of transfer form or letter of process must be known and be executed by the seller, who is the mortgagor. Now, apart from that, these days, experience has shown that particularly when you are buying mortgage property, it's important one can be oblivious. You might not take cognizance of the need for the building approval. The building plan, the approved building plan of the property you want to buy. If it's a mortgage property, most likely it's going to be a developed property.
That's correct, yes.
Land is not all that suitable for mortgage. But if it is land, fine, the issue of building plan approval will not be necessary. But where is a developed property, for whatever reason you might want to redevelop. In fact, these days, physical planning authority, they do planning audits. They ask for, even existing building, old building, they ask for the display or presentation of the approval. So if the approval is not there, it means the buyer will suffer a degree of risk, right? So part of the document that must be collected in this type of transaction too is the building plan approval. Now, if the bank does not have it, the mortgagor is the one selling, is the owner of his property. He should have it. So buyer should collect that along the line. Okay? These are the documents that should be collected, should be obtained while consummating this, just like any other real estate transactions by sales, right? Save that in this case it involves special document, which is deed of release. Yes. Now, having obtained all this, that deed of release should first of all be filed in the land registry so that the property will now be free from encumbrances. Yes. The experience that I mentioned earlier, it was a case that the guy paid up, he didn't even collect deed of release from the bank. He just collected all his original and felt that, all is well. He's not owing. They gave him his paper.
Apparently, all was not well.
All was not still well. But he didn't know. So that release must be done.
I like the fact that you mentioned this document. They are like checklists that people should, all those boxes need to be checked so that you know that there is no issue that can come up at some point later.
That's a very good hint for both practitioners and even for the investors.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. This has been very informative. Please remember to follow all our social media platforms displayed at the bottom of the screen. I'd like to tell you all to continue to stay. I'd like to tell you all to continue to stay safe, and we will see you next time as we continue this program. Bye bye from me.